Chiedo a tutti.
Ladies and gentlemen, will you please go back to your seats? We will start with the last session of today's conference. As we already said when we spoke about the working groups, we will now speak about climate change and the impact on and the lack of water on health. I'm afraid that you will have to sit down so that everybody can hear at the back. And I think that you can hear me if I speak into this microphone. The working group on this subject was presented this afternoon at the beginning of the session. What I'm interested is to point out the fact that climate change have very often been seen as something which will come in the future. Very often we speak about in 2100, maybe 2100. But this is not only when we will have irreversible disasters. The problem is that climate change are here now, causing environmental disasters. Think of the glaciers that are melting too early. Think of the rising of the sea levels. Think of tornadoes that have once again started to hit on Europe. Try to think of how the events of the past have multiplied, accelerated, and created major disasters and death. This fact highlights that we have to start acting straight away and not wait for the conclusion of summits that are passing the responsibility on from one to another, starting in 1997 right up to last year. Now there will be new meetings that will tend to postpone yet again. Countries like the United States, thanks to their president, are saying that there is no such thing as climate change. Well, vis-a-vis the situation, and we will speak about the health issue. Next week in Bonn, there will be a COP on climate change, and the health sector will also be brought into that discussion. And I would like to say it once again that climate change is not something abstract. They have people who are actually responsible, industrialists, people who don't care about the environment. But the very same causes that lead to climate change are those that lead, of course, to air pollution. This year, all of the most important newspapers have written and told us we have about 190,000 deaths in Italy for air pollution, 500,000 in Europe, and both the WHO and the World Bank and other bodies, such as the United Nations, have said that there are about 8 to 10 million people who die in the world because of the effects of climate change and therefore air pollution. Climate change, which come from the same source, that is to say, the burning of fossil fuels, have effects that sum up. We have one cause. We can see it in Milan these days, for example. We've seen it in Turin. In Turin, there was actually the building up of two factors. Climate change that enhanced the developing of fire. There were human beings who had lit the fires, but then the fires spread to a number of beautiful valleys in Piedmont, and these, of course, go hand in hand with the usual causes of air pollution due to the CO2 emissions from cars and industries and so on. In Turin, there were up to 6 times the number of particulate that there should be by law. Here in Milan, we have almost the same situation. The whole of the Po River Valley is in this same situation. And what can we do? We have to intervene on the responsible causes, which belong to one and the other. The burning of fossil fuels and the whole of economy, which has based itself on products to be burnt as sources of energy. Coal, oil, methane, biomasses. But we're not only working to save the lives of our children or grandchildren, but to save the lives of those who are living in our world today. This is the serious thing. And the element which is harsh enough in itself in terms of economic damage. The World Bank has worked out that hundreds of thousands of working days have been lost on a yearly basis. And to this we have to add the climate change which is underway. Climate change is the consequence of an increase of CO2 emissions, which has gone on for centuries. 270 parts per million. In the half of the middle of the last century, it was 370. Today, it's over 400 parts per million. We have increased the temperature by 1 degree. So we already have the effect of whole areas of the earth which where the ice is melting, and this is there for everybody to see, and it's extremely serious. Any action that can worsen this situation will have environmental, health, and economic effects that will grow. Very often we think of air pollution as a cause of death and sickness. But what about climate change? Climate change has at least 3 types of effects according to the WHO. First, a direct effect. In 2003, in Europe, in Italy, but also this year, there have been incredible heat waves and extremely hot weather, which have led to a great number of casualties in Europe as well, especially the weaker part of the population, the elderly, children, and so on. So the first effect are the heat waves. The second effect are the effects of extreme change. People who die because of floods, tornadoes. And for all of these situations, which have become somewhat regular when once they were totally abnormal. And then we have the facts that besides this normal air pollution, there is also another thing, because there's the hole in the ozone layer in most of Europe and Italy. For example, it produces nitrogen oxides, and it broadens according to, and it broadens and it lets through ultraviolet rays and heat. And this is due to climate change. So it's an effect that feeds itself and that feeds air pollution. These are the direct effects. Then we have the indirect secondary effects, everything that causes damage to our health, because climate change has had an impact on the fundamental factors such as the availability of water. I'm talking about clean water, not polluted water, the effect on agriculture, the effects on our food. Of course, if there's no clean water, if there's no water at all, we will not be able to produce food. This has an immediate effect in terms of damaging health. A change in temperature will also lead to the fact that there are some organisms, think of the tiger mosquitoes and others, that will come to us as if we were in a tropical area. And we will have to live with them. The chikungunya, for example, which struck the Romagna area and then the Lazio area and could increase. The same thing could occur with dengue, malaria. And finally, we have effects on health that we might call of a third level, which is stress. The agriculturists, for example, farmers, for the populations in the south of the world, who would have to live in unlivable areas and would have to emigrate. And this would lead to the most severe of the effects of climate change, along with a mass movement of people, the danger of conflict. Because if there is there is a growing nationalistic attitude, there is always a risk of conflict. The scenario is extremely serious, and we all need to commit ourselves individually and collectively so that the production model will change. It cannot be based on fossil fuels or energy sources that have to be burned, but what nature tells us to do, because while we burn matter to obtain energy, the economy of nature, in nature, let's say, there is solar energy that can be used to change and recycle matter, or otherwise we can put it and funnel it into our production system, otherwise we will risk enormous damage. The first of which we can feel right now, but can lead to disastrous proportions that can be forecast. I'm not a catastrophist myself. I'm not going to say that all the ice in the world will melt tomorrow, but the problems are here for us to see. When and how they will become irreversible, I don't know, but sooner or later this will happen. And this is a responsibility that we have to take upon ourselves and therefore act in a strong, aware manner towards the institutions. For example, the effects of water and food and what will happen to us in the future. This is something that Emilio Molinari knows very well about and that he will talk to us about in his presentation.
Io vorrei iniziare con chiedendovi di riflettere su di una provocazione.
I would like to start off with something that sounds provoking by a novelist, Bengalese novelist, who recently published a book entitled Big Blindness, Blindness Towards Climate Change. The author accuses his colleagues or world literature because they, in the past centuries, they have been focusing, and Amitav Ghosh is the name of the author. He said that they have been focusing on human rights and they have neglected the non-human. And by non-human, we don't mean animal rights defenders, but we mean material things. First of all, he means climate change, water, land, and air. This worldliness, this material aspects of life which have been neglected. So it sounds very provocative in his book, and which serves as a call to include these issues in our policies and in our culture. So we should ask ourselves whether we are integrating these aspects in our policies, in our culture. Amitav Ghosh's suggestion calls for a change of paradigm. We should be reasoning in terms of a very short term, next few years. We cannot dream about a far away future. Climate change is characterized in its by its central element, by water. Water, as a result of climate change, is decreasing. Man-made activities, manufacturing in particular, already decrease the amount of available water, and later on the Industrial Revolution and the Green Revolution in agriculture, reducing the amount of available water. Data are for everybody to see. In the past 70 years, water has gone down by half. In 2050, the United Nations expects that 50% of water demand for all man-made activities, for our basic needs, water to drink, for food production and for health purposes. So 50% of water will not be satisfied, will not be fulfilled, meaning that around 50% of the population will lack water. So we all realize what that means. 2050 is around the corner. Our children will live to that time, our grandchildren. Drought is reducing the amount of available water. Drought is, again, for everyone to see. We are experiencing drought. The amount of groundwater is decreasing. This year, the Po water sources, water springs, are not providing water. This has occurred for the second time in history. Italy is the 6th or the 7th largest industrial country of the world, and Rome had its water supply rationed in this year. There are lakes which are dry. The Po River itself serving as one of the major water sources. And when water goes down, the amount of pollutants go up, which means that it costs more to sanitize water, to purify water for drinking purposes. Floods, extreme weather events, not only result in casualties and disease, but they also pollute water sources. They since rainfalls are violent, storms are very violent, they do not feed groundwater, and they end up directly into the sea. Toxic substances being washed over arable land means that land is polluted, rivers are polluted, aqueducts are destroyed, again resulting in more costs to make water drinkable, and also higher risks for the health of population. The United Nations is trying to reassure us that development goals on hunger have been successful. The amount of people suffering from hunger has been halved, and people suffering from water shortages, I'm afraid, are going up. And there are today, as of today, 900 million people, over 900 million people lack access to water, to drinking water. Over 1 billion people have no access to sanitation. 1.8 million children die every year because of a very simple disease, for which there is no need for big research or big pharma interventions, because this disease is diarrhea, and 1.8 children die every year because of diarrhea. You tap 20 times on the table and one child is dead. So, because of the demand increase, because of pollution, because of climate change, droughts and so on and so forth, all this is bound to chart a new geography which is not made of north and south, but the moving boundaries of creating new groups of people which are very likely to get ill, and those who are more likely than others to be treated and to be cured because they have access to water, healthcare and so on. In Europe, lack of water affects 25% of its territory, and 16% of European population has no direct access to and consistent access to drinkable water. The European MP, Spanish MP that we have here today, and I think that Spain is one of the countries facing a big threat for drought, followed by France and Italy. 16% is a lot of people. In Italy, one citizen out of 3 has no access regularly to drinking water. 8 million people have no access to drinking water at all. In Italy, 8 million people, which means that they cook with the water that coming out of the tap, but they cannot drink it, and they need to buy bottled water. I was in by the seaside in Liguria this year, and there are small villages there where you can use running water for cooking purposes, but not for drinking. Also in the south of Italy, or in the mountains, in the Apennines. This is the case in Italy today. They want to reassure us with research, with progress. Computers are revolutionizing our life. We lead a very advanced life, but since 1990, which was the start of water privatization in Italy, well, since then, the number of people with access to continuous access to drinking water has declined, which means that access to drinking water has been reduced, whereas water fees have increased by over 40%, and investments have plummeted. So there is talk about the need to privatize water. And then the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean basin is experiencing the worst drought in 900 years. 400 million people living around the Mediterranean area are living in a water-stressed area, which means they have 9 cubic meters of water per year, which is a very small amount. 700 cubic meters of water per year. This is the amount of water that is available to over 200 million people. Think about Egypt, the Maghreb area, these countries in the Mediterranean basin. The 700 cubic meters is the threshold set by the UN for an area which is at risk of a water conflict. So it's clear that if demand water goes up and demand supply goes down, it's clear that world powers, and in particular multinational companies, are rushing in this area. Multinationals replace the United Nations. The United Nations has no decision power. It is the Water Council making decisions on water. Negotiations at world level for TTIP, for CTA, for TISA, including water services and everything. It's the water mandate, which is made up of 100 multinationals sending their experts, their technicians, deciding the negotiations, making decisions, because these companies need water. They range from water managing companies to water bottling companies, beer producing companies, all of them, Unilever, supermarket chains, all entities which have an interest in water and eventually replace public institutions in the decision-making process. Now, laws that are passed in the Italian government, the European Parliament, affect all this. As Mr. Tognoni was reminding this morning, is water a common good or a trade commercial good? Is water a human right or not? The only movement that succeeded in having something was the water movement, convincing the UN to make small changes about water. And water was defined as an economic good. No institution changed in its laws the word economic good. In Europe, water is considered as an economic good. behind this term, this definition, all referendum are cancelled. An attempt is made to privatize water and to introduce the criteria for a world water price. Not just water, drinking water, but water used in agriculture and for other uses. And water is privatized in order to be sold. And also to set up a water stock exchange. This is what they're trying to do. And many of the wars, of the conflicts being fought today, according to the High Commissioner for Refugees, estimates that there are 79 conflicts right now for around water. 79 conflicts. For instance, the war in Syria. The war in Syria, which is going on right now. When we think about Syria, we think about the Arab Spring, and as the root cause of the conflict, next to religion, next to other issues. Yet Syria, before the Arab Spring occurred, had experienced 5 years of terrible drought, which is not over yet, and 1.5 migrants, refugees from the countryside to the cities, leading to continuous conflicts in the country. These are the causes of conflicts. Egypt, for instance, the Arab Spring in Egypt, everyone was convinced that it was a matter of modernizing the country, of democratizing it. True, but that was also a war on bread. There was a war for bread. And Egypt has 90 million inhabitants, 135 expected by 2050. And it thrives on the Nile. Nile is under attack right now. It's polluted because of large dikes being built, also supported by China, experiencing industrialization, of course, which is trying to build one of the largest dam on the Nile. And this will result in thirst in the area and in Kenya as well, where the water in one of its largest lakes will be halved. Think about war in the Kurdish war, which has been going on for so long. Tigris and Euphrates rivers in the Kurdish area. They also have oil. And no one, neither Turkey, neither either countries, are prepared to leave this to anyone else. These are the things that countries are fighting for. Not to mention the Jordan River. Sometimes I wonder. And I'm asking this question to you as well. We consider ourselves as Democrats, left-wing people. Can we continue to witness climate change, water issues, or shouldn't we change our cultural attitude and stop saying that this is very true, but when I go home, I go home and I go on with my own life, with the work of my association, with my own passions, and I'm not prepared to change a single thing. There was a referendum, then everyone went home, and the government simply went on with business as usual. No further privatization of water was performed, was implemented, luckily, but I don't know for how long, because they are moving towards privatization, also in Italy and in Apulia, for instance.
Another thing, I was listening to you in your work group today, and I heard you emphasize the idea of good practices. I perfectly agree with you that something has to be done. It is a priority. But if you think that you're going to change yourself and nothing more, well, then nothing will change. If there isn't an attempt to set up national European movements and maybe international movements, and here there's a role of Vittorio. Vittorio is the only person who understood the world dynamics during also in his role and his authoritativeness in the International World Forum. Can we revitalize water, the water problem? Can we think of stopping privatization and so on? Even on the small things, these are very deceitful. They accepted ideas from the movement and put them in the law. 50 liters a day per person is an acknowledgement of human rights. But do you know what they wrote next to it? Therefore, we'll go back to what Gianni was saying this morning. They wrote 50 liters every day per person, poor, for poor person. In other words, they turned what was supposed to be a universal human right to something that you should give to the poor. They have made a social welfare issue out of it. That is to say that they turned a right into a welfare issue. I was talking about the dams in Ethiopia. They're all being manufactured by a Milanese company, Impregilo, in Milan. But of course we can demonstrate against them and tell them to stop destroying the land of Ethiopia and the soil of Ethiopia. We had a referendum on the drilling into the land, and we lost it because nobody really understood what it was about. Well, then, if we're talking about going from fossil fuels to other fuels, well, then we should say that in the Mediterranean area we should not drill anymore. But it's the Italian government with the big hydrocarbons company that's doing it. And all of these people are doing it. In Germany, there was a relaunch in coal. In the UK, the same. So coal is coming back. Do you know what Renzi did at the electricity board here in Milan? Well, of course, we don't have coal here. So what did he say? I will go to Montenegro and I will bring electricity from here. And he made a law whereby he has detaxed all the imports of electricity from Montenegro. I think that within ourselves and in our passions, we should try to find the dimensions that we once had. I'm a little bit nostalgic, if you like. I don't know if you remember, but when we started a meeting, we always started as follows. the international situation and our tasks. The idea that there's a world and that this world is no different, there's no separation between my daily actions by my daily suffering. It is something that goes together. But we'll have to think about this, and with this I will close. In 2004, the Pentagon wrote as follows: the next wars will be fought for reasons of survival. In the next 20 years, being there will be a drop in the number of people on the planet who will be able to survive will definitely be smaller than now. And the population of the Earth will be reduced to a sustainable number. So the actual concept of sustainability has been overturned. It's not the anthropic human activities that have to be sustainable for the planet, but the population has to do this. And mind you, behind this, and I don't think I'm exaggerating, that in the accounts, the world accounts of somebody, 3 billion people are considered unsustainable and in exuberance. That is the world that we have before us. And that is why it is worthwhile to start forming movements that will have something to say. Thank you. Thank you very much, Emilio. I think it's very important that you highlighted the need to change your mindset, to change your personal paradigm, because otherwise we're not going to go everywhere. For example, the idea of privatization is generalized. Whatever service is going to be privatized. We were talking about healthcare services. Now we were talking about water. But services in general seem to be the goal of privatization. Everything has to become wares that have to be sold. You see, the sick are functional too, because in a logic of goods, although we have a good life expectation, but a bad expectation of health, because after 60 years, a healthy life is no longer there, and these are Italian data. In Italy, we are very much worse than the other countries in Europe for state of health after 60. So if we allow only the rich to have access to healthcare, and the rich who will live, although sick, for a long time, well then we cannot leave a situation like this. And that is what's being done. Money is being made rather than invested in healing people. The only word that you will never find in official documents is the word prevention. Prevention. It's not only an early screening process, but it's prevention in the whole sense of its term. I now give the floor to Mohammed Khaldi, who is a doctoral student and has been dealing with healthcare in the tropical areas. Will be able to bring a new view to our discussion.
For giving that opportunity for me to give an overview about the Palestinian situation. Actually, I want to add just one point for Dr. Emilio about the water problems in Palestine. We know that we have illegal settlements in West Bank, especially. It's really built illegally, and each settler daily uses 300 liters per day, but the Palestinian person, he used only or about 15 liters. I would like to talk about the violation of healthcare access as a genuine human rights in Palestine. An overview actually about like what I'm going to talk about. First, it's like country profile and contextual information. The second point, it's about socio-demographic and economic geopolitics aspect. The third is about the health situation and the healthcare system in Palestine. The fourth, about the health access and what's going on related to the health access in Palestine. And the end, it's about the conclusion. We know that we have now inside Palestine 4 million, and the rest of the 4 million, other 4 million displacing around the world because they are displaced by Israeli occupation since 60 years ago. We can see that our economic completely dependent on the occupation because it's really completely tied and constrained by the Israel restrictions and the practices, and we have very high up unemployment and poverty rate due to the humanitarian and political situation deterioration. We have political issues related to the healthcare access. We can see the separation walls that built by Israeli occupation. This is in West Bank and separates many of areas and prevents the schools and the children to get the schools and the patient to get health care and the employer to get their workplace and the farmer to get their fields or farms. And we have the other side in Gaza Strip, where I live. We have very open, highly populated area around the world. 2 million lives inside. And we are in very open and big open air prison. We are like prisoners because we have 3 crossings now. So the health status in Palestine, we have a quite good health system for healthcare providers, MOH by the government, UNRWA is like UN agency providing healthcare, private and NGOs. Health system completely fragmented, and it's not like attached or like cohesive because many of like administrative and geographical separation. Our health system completely humanitarian and emergency responsive system because we don't have any development plans. Most of our systems like education, like health, like economy, completely based on a humanitarian and emergency and unstable situation. We can see the main causes death in Palestine. I think most of the region's causes in Middle East are like similar main causes. We can see cardiovascular disease, cancer, and stroke, and the last lowest causes is infectious disease. And we have very good health, national health indicators, but sometimes if some devastations happens, like invasion, like bombing, like military operation, then all of these indicators will go up actually. Now, most of the people in Palestine completely covered, or we can say like almost covered, 82% of the Palestinians, because we have 4 health insurance schemes. We know that we have international laws and conventions about the health as a human rights laws, but all of these laws and regulation actually in Palestine completely violated by Israel occupation. The human rights care is really a basic human right, particularly because most of the governments are really asked to protect that human rights, and this is announced by WHO. What are the factors that hindering the healthcare in Palestine? We can see security check. If you want to cross just 1 meter, 100 meter, you can cross at least 4 or 5 checkpoints. If you are a patient or employee or a student, etc. The second, this is in West Bank, completely detached or fragmented areas, because we have 3 categories, A, B, C areas. A and B, it's completely under the Palestinian Authority. C, it constitutes 60% of West Bank, it's C area, and this is absolute under the Israel's occupation, and no one can get there. Even the Palestinians live in this area, they don't have accessibility to get any care or services. The third factor, aggression, wars, and riots. They bombing everything, especially the hospitals, healthcare centers, and they enter the hospitals, and they can sentence or they can kidnap, and they can take patients or visitors from the hospital. The last factor, permission. If you want to get care from Gaza to West Bank or it's vice versa, you have to submit for permission. Or maybe you can get that permission after 2 months or maybe 3 months. And sometimes they are invited you for interview for a security aspect, asking you about the information about your neighbors, your relatives or your fathers, everything, like interrogating. We have 2 dimensions. The first thing that, like passing the health supplies and medical equipment, it's not allowed. It's really restricted from the crossing. The second thing, the freedom of people, or the moving of people across the crossing or the borders are really restricted, even for the patients and for the health medical professionals and international delegates as well. Some foreigners, they subjected to be interviewed or some things like to be rejected or refused by the Israel occupation authorities. The realities about the healthcare accessibility in Palestine, we have many challenges actually, especially for the Israel restrictions, because many of barriers, checkpoints as I said, and separation walls, this is in West Bank, the border closure and like siege imposed in Gaza Strip became like a big open air prison. We have 4 procedures that's already imposed by Israelis. One is difficult permit issuance, really difficult procedures if you want to get a permission. The second thing, delayed on the checkpoints. You can wait a lot of hours in the checkpoints, and longer distance. And this is one of my findings for the PhD, and most of the experts, they highlighted that the healthcare access, it's really health research priority. We have to investigate and to search about that problem. Factors reported by MAP UK, this is international organization, and WHO as well. And we can see many of like shocking figures and statistics. And we can see the permission. The permission goes down since like long ago, and now it goes steadily down. The second thing, this is the procedure, the whole procedure that most of the patients, they want to get care, they have to enter or to go through that procedures. The pregnant and their babies, they already checked and stopped on the checkpoints. And we can see 10% of the pregnant, of the Palestinian woman, were forced and used to get delivery on the checkpoints. And they can get two scenarios: more complications or death. Other violating issue related to the healthcare access, damaging the health facilities and hospital, as I showed you. The last war in Gaza, 50% of the primary health centers and 17 hospitals completely destroyed by Israel's airstrikes. And we can see, this is a pictures from the last war. Ambulance completely crushed, and here one of the patient rooms. Conclusion, healthcare access is essentially, it's not like health system problems, completely. We can restore the health system, our health system, to be improved, because we have 82% healthcare coverage. Healthcare access negatively affected by occupation. This is really very important factor. We should consider and focus about that. Where the healthcare system in Palestine shows a country really struggling because many of challenges in addition to the occupation and its consequences. Despite of financial crisis, we have many problems: financial problems, economic problems, government dependency on the international aid, and also demographic changes and lack of good governance and many of other challenges. However, the health system or health care continues to be provided in acceptable manner. But if the occupation really ended and all of its procedures lifted, certainly the health research or the health system in Palestine will be improved and will restore the full potentials and capacities to be working well functioning. This is the message about 6,000 Palestinian prisoners. This is actually, it's completely ignored by the politicians. We have 6,000 Palestinians in the prisons, and they don't get a good care or any medications in the prisons. And we have many of reports by international organizations highlighting that. Health or right to get access for the health care seriously jeopardized by the Israeli authorities. Actually, I have some solutions to be considered or to be taken in our focus and scope. We have to ask the government decision makers to steer up the issue of international, of that issue, like healthcare access in Palestine, in the international forums and the platforms. More attention, we need more attention and execution action or serious actions by international agencies to raise this life-threatening issue. Whether it's by WHO or other international agencies or like governmental or like presidential or ministerial platforms. Practice more pressure and like tensions on the concerned party, especially the government and the politicians' associations. Promote advocacy and mobilization initiatives and campaigns. And we have to build really network with the organizational associations in Palestine, especially who are working in the health field. We have to fight, or we have to put more efforts aiming to break down that institutionalization, because most of the restrictions has been actually institutionalized. It become like routine. If you want to get care, before you are seeking for provider or like which kind of care, you have to start your process to get your permission, to get access or to cross the borders to get that permission. and we must to build and to extend the bridges rather than building separation walls. And thank you so much for inviting me for this important event.
Grazie per questo intervento che mette in luce la...
Thank you very much for this presentation where you showed how dramatic it is when the right to health is certainly denied. It is much more serious than it is in other countries. Having said this, we must never forget this, because we have to commit ourselves to have the same rights for all the inhabitants of the planet. In certain parts of the planet, of course, it is dramatic, because there is no right to common assets, essential as they are. I now give the floor for the conclusions to Estefania Torres Martinez, but I would like to introduce her before doing that. She is a Spanish member of parliament belonging to Podemos, and she belongs to the Environment Commission. She's going to read a text in English, at the end of which there will be some time, and if you wish to ask questions in Italian, you can ask them in Italian and Roberto will translate. I apologize from now, because in 5 to 10 minutes I will have to leave, because I have a train to catch, and of course that train does not follow my my personal commitments.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the invitation. I am so sorry for my English, because it's not my language and I can't speak it very well, but I try to do it as good as I can. So I want to say something. First, I arrived in the afternoon due to a very tight flight schedule, but in time to listen the emotional and very important intervention of Zeynep Barol, for whose right we stand up in the European Parliament, and we have collected signatures to support her and her fight as woman, as doctor, and also as holder of human rights. I would like to begin my speech by thanking the hosts of this event. I'm proud to be able to participate in this GUE initiative that tries to make visible how climate change affects different areas related to health. I would like to appeal to the European Union to change. Okay. I was saying that I would like to appeal to the European Union to change urgently the policy, mainly those that may have a harmful impact at health conditions of population. In a few days, I will participate as representative of the official delegation of the GUE in the Conference of the Parties of the United Nations. In the battle against climate change, we should be accomplish the commitment in the laws and the MAGE fund to be able to supply the countries most affected by natural disasters, desertification, gradual increase in temperature and other adverse situations, and try to adapt them to the new scenario created by climate change. We must achieve financial commitments from the most developed countries that are the ones that have contaminated the most to date. It is a question of historical responsibility. It is necessary to defend the right to food that goes beyond the food sovereignty that we defend so much, since it's a global concept that involves a way of life and also our relation with the food. We are what we eat. We are into a spiral of industrial consumerism where multinationals press to implement their parasite production and distribution model that devastates everything in its path. I have seen firsthand the expropriation and land grabbing in Brazil to the Guarani tribes by macro companies and corporations. We have fought in Parliament with my partner Catarina Konecka a battle against the exploitation of palm oil, whose consumption affects public health while destroying the environment. Also, my colleague Lynn Boylan from Sinn Féin, in her defense of the European Citizen Initiative Right to Water, called out for free access to water for all. According to the focus of the G7 summit, the dangerous decisions made by the most powerful states and private multinational companies. There are no goals of how to improve sustainability, welfare, disease reduction, or universal access to common goods, such as water and land exploitation. However, they propose to reduce the right to health and dignity for a commercial exchange and that supports the costs that have to be assumed by citizens. It's the next steps toward the privatization of the healthcare and the public structures. The austerity policies promulgated by the European Union has the approval of multinationals, pharmaceutical lobbies, and other private entities that benefit from the most basic need, that is the health care. From Podemos, we have denounced this on different occasions. During economic crisis, the conservative government excels in basic service to the population. These governments are answering a liberal way of thinking that leaves the citizen lack in fundamental rights. This international forum should be a voice in defense of the basic universal rights for each citizen of the world. Also for the free access to medicines without being prisoner of the high prices of private patents and their pharmaceutical lobbies. We have the obligation to guarantee access to basic therapies and to be audacious legalizing medical treatments such as cannabis that have given the solution to an unmanageable chronic pain. Such access and the dignity of vulnerable people is one of the central goals of the GUE, NGL, and MIPS engaged in the environment and public health commitment. We are ready to continue cooperation based on your suggestions and the riches of this debate. I apologize because my English and because I couldn't follow the whole debate because my flights program from abroad. Thank you for your attention.
Grazie moltissimo a Estefania Torres Martinez, grazie al GUE per aver permesso la
Thank you very much. I want to thank once again GUE for organizing this initiative, to the Milan's council group, and for everyone working for the organization of this event, Health Without Masters and Borders. Now, before reading out the final declaration, let me thank other people who have worked with us. I want to thank Luca, working with me, next to me for the past month. He put up with me with my bad temper. I want to thank the staff of Milan in Comune, Leo and Emilio, making this possible. And I want to thank Roberto, our man in Havana, our precious intermediary, working for us. And before reading out the declaration, let me thank everyone, all the volunteers who contributed to today's works, and the coordinators, the session coordinators, and the interpreters, and our staff, technical staff, who have been very precious in making this event possible. Thank you very much. Now, the final declaration, which I'm going to read out, aims at summing up today's work. Of course, is not going to be exhaustive. If you have any comments, there is an email address, diritto alla salute 2017 gmail.com. We will open leave this email open for a few days so that you have the chance to send your comments. Last time I received a 32-page comment, so please try to be shorter than that. The World Health Organization, since it was set up in 1946, aimed at guaranteeing to all populations the highest possible level of health, which is defined as as a state of physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely as the absence of disease or infirmity. 70 years later, the reality is very different, and that aim is far from being reached. Environment, welfare, healthcare services, and access to drugs are threatened by profit rationale, increasing inequalities. From the 5th and 6th of November, Milan will host the G7 on health to discuss about climate change, women's health, and young people's health, and antimicrobial resistance. We do not feel protected by those who have promoted privatization efforts which threaten health. Therefore, we need to stress that health is everybody's right and cannot be commercialized. So we think that health and disease are not distributed equally among the population, but they are determined by social, economic, cultural, and environmental determinants, which in turn are the result of affected by several factors, including gender, background, and citizenship rights. In particular, disease and mortality affect mostly people who are most disadvantaged. Austerity politics set up in the majority of countries since 2008 made things worse, whereas what was needed was to invest more in welfare in order to limit crisis on health. The safeguard of health is first and foremost a political fact. So we call for fairer taxation policies, we call for the strengthening of welfare systems and with no discrimination, safeguarding all people with no discrimination. Health systems and a right to health. The governments of the majority of countries, including the ones who have a public national system, have been reducing the budget for health. They are pursuing privatization of healthcare services, and they are reducing universal access to treatment. This is jeopardizing the founding principles of universalism and solidarity, leading to inequalities. A reduction of public commitment is accompanied by following leads to a situation whereby healthcare is privatized based on working contracts benefits or for ones who can afford it. Yet it has been proved that public healthcare systems are more efficient than private ones. They provide more guarantees in safeguarding health, and they are less expensive. In view of the international mobilization campaign on the 7th of April, the World Health Day, we commit to promote and defend the following principles. First, the right to health is a fundamental human right and not a source for profit. Thereby, healthcare services should be protected by any market rationale. Prevention and promotion, health promotion, should be at the center of all aspects of life and work. 3. In order to guarantee effective healthcare services accessible to everybody, governments need to commit themselves by providing adequate resources. 4. Healthcare services, investments and funding should be based on taxation on the principle of redistribution of resources. And number 5, people should play an active role in their treatment and in the definition of healthcare policies at local, national and global levels. Access to drugs and TRIPS agreements. After a long-standing situation of inequality in access to drugs, we have identified the following long-term objectives which we need to aim at to make a real change. Number 1, to promote independent public research at national and European level. This is limited nowadays versus research funded by multinationals, and whereas it should be targeted at public health within the public health system. Number 2, new standards on testing, producing and selling drugs. Very often drugs are put on the market with surrogate indicators without taking into account the survival rate and quality of life. Number 3, for proven products, we need a compulsory license as it is pursuant to the TRIPS agreement. And 5, the creation of setting up of public companies for producing drugs.
Climate change and health. It has been proven that climate change, which are caused by the current model of development, change many determining social and environmental factors of health, such as the quality of air, access to drinking water, and sufficient food. The World Health Organization has estimated that between 2030 and 2050, climate change will cause over 250,000 further deaths a year due to malnutrition, malaria, diarrhea, and heat stress. The cost of direct damage to health, excluding therefore costs in support sectors, are estimated to be around $2 to $4 billion a year by 2030. In the institutional meetings, programs to reduce global warming are very often not attended. The situation continues to worsen, especially for the poorer populations, with climate disasters that increase the number intensity caused also by grievous damage to health. For this reason, we commit ourselves to working on activities of training, information, and raising of awareness on climate change in order to produce change and in the individual behaviors and in collective behaviors on the one hand, and also the reduction of consumption on the other. We ask that fossil energy sources are progressively put aside and replaced in a short time by more favorable ones for environmental impact. We are aware that these objectives will be able to be achieved only if we're able to implement a lot of common intents between the social movements of the whole world and of the various sectors of the scientific world. Today's conference has been a step forward in this direction, and we would like to make available many very worthy contributions that have been the outcome of today's discussions. We are aware that a better world made to measure of each living being can only be the fruit of a collective effort shared by millions, billions of persons, and we have always felt that we are part of this community which is fighting and is going forward.
Grazie, ringraziamo ancora.
Thank you very much. I want to thank Estefania once again, who made it to be here in time to provide her contribution. We will continue to work with them, of course, and tomorrow in Via Olio 96 from 9 o'clock onwards, there is a meeting of networks of Italian associations for health to draw up an agenda for health. The right address is Via Olio number 8. 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, Italian Networks for a Common Agenda. Thank you very much.